I have proof, she whispered. Seconds later, my perfect marriage shattered. In aerospace engineering, we spend our entire careers studying the mechanics of catastrophic failure. We build sophisticated computer models to simulate how a single microfracture in a titanium fuselage can tear a spacecraft apart at 30,000 feet. We are trained to look for stress points, to calculate the exact moment a structure will stop bending and simply snap. I spent 14 years at a major defense contractor in Denver applying these exact principles to orbital launch vehicles. I knew how to predict failure in complex systems. But I never saw the microfractures in my own marriage, and I certainly never anticipated the complete structural collapse of the family I had spent a decade helping to build. It started on a Tuesday afternoon in late October. I was sitting in my office, reviewing structural schematics, when my personal cell phone rang. It was an unrecognized number with a local area code. Normally, I let those go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Is this Marcus?" a woman's voice asked. She sounded breathless, not from physical exertion, but from the kind of deep, vibrating anxiety that tightens your chest. "Speaking," I said, setting my pen down. "You don't know me," she continued, her voice trembling slightly before finding its footing. "My name is Victoria. I'm the wife of the man your wife has been sleeping with for the past 8 months. And I think we need to talk. There is a specific sensation when your brain refuses to process a piece of information because it fundamentally contradicts the reality you live in. My wife, Claire, was a pediatric nurse. We had been married for 9 years. We spent our weekends hiking in the Rockies and our Sundays having dinner with her parents, Robert and Martha, who lived just 20 minutes away in Boulder. We were trying for a baby. "I think you have the wrong number," I said quietly, my hand instinctively gripping the edge of my desk. "Claire," Victoria said, the name dropping like a stone in a quiet pond. "She drives a white Volvo XC90. She drinks oat milk lattes. She tells you she works a double shift on alternating Thursdays, but she doesn't. She spends those Thursdays at the Four Seasons downtown with my husband, Julian. Marcus, please, meet me. I have proof. I have everything." We agreed to meet at a small, dimly lit coffee shop on the outskirts of Aurora, far away from anyone we might know. When I arrived, Victoria was already sitting in a corner booth. She was a sharply dressed woman, maybe in her late 30s, but her eyes carried a profound, hollow exhaustion that I recognized immediately. It was the look of someone who had survived an impact but hadn't yet realized they were bleeding. I slid into the booth across from her. Neither of us ordered coffee. Victoria didn't offer empty apologies or long-winded explanations. She reached into her leather handbag and placed a small silver USB drive on the wooden table between us. It looked entirely ordinary, just a piece of metal and plastic, but it carried the weight of a live grenade. "Julian is careless with his digital footprint," Victoria said, her voice steady but barely above a whisper. "He left his iPad synced to his cloud account. I spent the last 3 days downloading everything. The text messages, the hotel receipts, the photos." She paused, and for the first time, a tear escaped, cutting a line down her cheek. "But Marcus, the affair isn't even the worst part. It's the logistics. It's who helped them." I frowned, a cold dread pooling in my stomach. "What do you mean?" Victoria pushed the USB drive an inch closer to me. "Just look at the folder labeled Weekends. I'm sorry, Marcus. I really am." I drove straight back to my lab. I didn't turn on the radio. The silence in the car was suffocating. I locked the door to my office, pulled the blinds shut, and plugged the silver drive into my secure laptop. The files were meticulously organized. Victoria had compiled a digital autopsy of our marriages. I clicked on the folder labeled Photos. The first image hit me like a physical blow to the chest. It was Claire, my beautiful, sensible wife, wearing a dress I had never seen, leaning against the balcony of a high-rise hotel, kissing a man in a tailored suit. Julian. There were dozens of pictures. Vacations I thought she was taking with her girlfriends. Dinners I thought she was working through. But then I opened the folder containing the text message exports, and the real devastation began. I scrolled through the explicit, affectionate exchanges between my wife and another man, feeling a sickening knot tighten in my throat. But then I noticed a group chat. It was titled Sunday Planning. The participants were Claire, Julian, and 2 other numbers I recognized instantly. Robert and Martha, my in-laws. My vision actually blurred. I had to grip the edge of my desk to steady myself. I opened the chat log and began reading. Martha, May 14th, 2:15 p.m. Marcus just called. He thinks you're here with us helping Robert in the garden. Take your time, honey. Enjoy the spa day with Julian. Claire, May 14th, 2:18 p.m. Thanks, Mom. You're the best. Tell Marcus I'll be home by 6. Robert, June 2nd, 8 p.m. Julian, that Cabernet you sent over is fantastic. Better than the cheap stuff Marcus usually brings. Looking forward to having you both over when he flies to Seattle next week. The betrayal was so absolute, so structurally profound, that it bypassed anger and went straight to a terrifying, icy clarity. Claire hadn't just made a mistake. She had orchestrated a second life, and her parents, the people who hugged me, who accepted the $20,000 loan I gave them to remodel their kitchen, who called me son, had served as her alibi. They hadn't just tolerated the affair. They had actively facilitated it. They preferred Julian, a wealthy real estate developer, to their dependable, predictable engineer son-in-law. They were all laughing at me in the dark. I didn't confront Claire when I went home that night. I walked through the front door, kissed her on the forehead, and ate the chicken piccata she had prepared. When Robert called to ask about my recent project at work, I answered politely, asking about his garden. The psychological toll of pretending was immense, a crushing pressure against my ribs, but engineering had taught me one vital lesson. You do not initiate a sequence until every variable is controlled. Panic is sloppy. Patience is lethal. The next morning, I met with Thomas Vance, a senior partner at a formidable family law firm in downtown Denver. I didn't just tell him my wife was cheating. I handed him the printed transcripts of the group chats, the financial receipts showing marital funds spent on hotel rooms, and the photographs. Thomas, a man who had seen every iteration of human cruelty in a courtroom, read through the pages in complete silence. When he finally looked up, he took off his reading glasses. "They are incredibly arrogant," Thomas said quietly. "They think I'm blind," I replied. "I want out, Thomas, but I don't want to just leave. I want them to build a trap and walk into it themselves. I want it on the record. We file for divorce based on irreconcilable differences, but we aggressively pursue the discovery phase," Thomas outlined, his eyes narrowing with tactical precision. "We depose Claire and Julian. We put them under oath. Liars rely on the assumption that you don't have the data. We won't just expose the infidelity. We will expose the financial fraud and the conspiracy. And we will invite her parents to attend the deposition as moral support." For the next 2 months, I lived a ghost's life in my own home. I slept next to a woman I knew was plotting against me. I attended Sunday dinners in Boulder, smiling at my in-laws while cutting my steak, knowing they were mentally spending my assets. I met Victoria twice more. We formed a strange, unspoken camaraderie, 2 soldiers navigating a war zone our spouses had created. She was initiating her own high-stakes divorce, freezing Julian's assets. We coordinated our timelines perfectly. The deposition was scheduled for a freezing morning in early January. It took place in a massive conference room at Thomas's firm. The long mahogany table felt like a battlefield. I sat beside Thomas, my face entirely impassive. Claire walked in, flanked by her aggressive, high-priced attorney. Julian sat at the far end of the table, looking bored and irritated by the inconvenience. As requested, Robert and Martha sat in the gallery chairs against the wall, projecting an aura of supportive indignation. They looked at me with a mixture of pity and contempt, fully believing I was just a bitter husband grasping at straws. A court reporter sat at the head of the table, her hands hovering over the stenotype machine. Thomas began with standard, agonizingly slow questions. Income, assets, daily routines. Claire answered with a practiced, sweet sincerity. Julian checked his watch twice. "Mrs. Davis," Thomas said, pacing slowly behind my chair, "could you describe the nature of your relationship with Mr. Julian Hayes?" "We are acquaintances," Claire said smoothly, not even blinking. "We run in the same social circles. We've had coffee a few times to discuss potential charity events." "I see," Thomas nodded. "And have you ever engaged in a romantic or physical relationship with Mr. Hayes?" "Absolutely not," Claire said, her voice dripping with offended dignity. Her lawyer leaned forward, glaring at Thomas. "Has your husband, Marcus, ever provided funds that you subsequently used to finance hotel stays or vacations with Mr. Hayes?" "No, that is a ridiculous accusation." Thomas turned his attention to Julian. "Mr. Hayes, do you corroborate Mrs. Davis's testimony? Your relationship is strictly platonic." "Entirely," Julian scoffed. "This is a fishing expedition." Thomas stopped pacing. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mrs. Davis, how often do you visit your parents on Thursday afternoons? Almost every Thursday, Claire answered, glancing nervously at her mother. I help them around the house. And your parents can verify your presence at their home on these specific dates? Thomas asked, gesturing vaguely. Yes, they can, Claire said, her voice slightly higher now. Thomas didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, bound dossier. He handed a copy to Claire's lawyer, a copy to Julian, and slid one across the table to Claire. Let the record reflect, Thomas said, his voice ringing with cold, metallic authority, that I am introducing Exhibit A, a comprehensive log of text messages spanning 8 months, legally obtained from a shared iCloud account. Mrs. Davis, I direct your attention to page 42. Could you please read the message sent from your phone to Mr. Hayes on Thursday, September 12th? Claire looked down at the page. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might lose consciousness. Her hands began to shake violently. She stammered, unable to form a word. If you prefer, I can read it, Thomas offered mercilessly. I can't wait to see you at the Four Seasons. Marcus thinks I'm fixing my dad's sink. Room 412. Her lawyer rapidly flipped through the dossier, his eyes widening in absolute horror as he realized his client had just committed blatant, documented perjury under oath. Now, Thomas continued, turning his gaze toward the wall where Robert and Martha sat frozen like statues. Let's turn to page 60, an export of a group chat titled, Sunday Planning. Mr. Hayes, perhaps you can explain why Robert here thanked you for a bottle of wine while explicitly plotting to deceive my client about your whereabouts. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I have ever heard. It was the sound of complete, structural annihilation. Julian stared at the documents, his jaw clenched, realizing Victoria had burned his entire life to the ground. Claire buried her face in her hands, letting out a jagged, pathetic sob. I looked past my ex-wife and locked eyes with my father-in-law, Robert. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The smug superiority was gone, replaced by the terrifying realization that they were entirely exposed. There was no defense. There were no excuses. They had built a house of cards, and I had just brought in a hurricane. I recommend we take a brief recess, Claire's lawyer croaked, looking physically ill. They didn't just lose the deposition. They lost everything. The leverage of perjury and documented asset dissipation meant the divorce settlement was a slaughter. I kept the house, the retirement accounts, and all of my investments. Claire received nothing but a mountain of legal debt. I legally pursued Robert for the $20,000 loan, forcing him to liquidate a portion of his retirement to pay me back to avoid a separate fraud lawsuit. Julian, facing Victoria's wrath in their own divorce, abandoned Claire entirely the moment his finances were threatened. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized. I drove out to the mountains on a crisp Saturday morning, pulling over at a scenic overlook near Estes Park. I leaned against the hood of my truck, breathing in the thin, cold pine air. People often ask me if the betrayal still hurts. The truth is, the pain faded much faster than I anticipated. When you are in a toxic environment, you think the struggle is normal. You think carrying the weight of manipulative people is just part of life. Looking back, the USB drive didn't destroy my life. It rescued me. It revealed the rot in the foundation before I built a family on it. I didn't need to check up on Claire or her parents. I didn't care if they were miserable. Revenge is a frantic, exhausting emotion, and I had no interest in carrying it. Instead, I found something infinitely more valuable. I found peace. I found the quiet, steady strength of a life rebuilt on honesty. And as I looked out over the vast, unbroken horizon of the Rockies, I realized that escaping the people who tried to break me wasn't just a victory. It was my freedom.